Max Gawn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Penderbury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. You're a couple of weeks down through the multi-bye rounds. You're officially over the halfway mark of your fantasy footy season. And so the downhill slide, maybe that phrase would sum up your fantasy year, but the downhill slide into the end of the year is well and truly on us, heading into round 14. And on this roundtable strategy conversation, there is a lot of stuff we've got to get to. Joining me on this episode, as he has right throughout the 2023 season, and in fact, since we've begun, fellow co-founder Rids. Hello, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. How are you?
I'm up and about, my friend, that is for sure. And the man that really should win the Rising Star of 2023, it is MiniMonk. Hello, mate. How are you, my friend?
You going to put some money on Harry Shearswell then?
Maybe on you. That's for sure where it'll be going. No, you and Harry have done very, very well in 2023. That's for sure. Speaking of money, if you want to invest some of yours into the Coaches Panel, you can join our Patreon supporter group. All the links, you can find the details for that in the description of this podcast. Just in the past couple of days, joining in at the premium tier, David Gross, Drew Sheps, and Sean V have all jumped in. So welcome to those fine gentlemen, legends of the fantasy community jumping on board the Patreon. You can support too with the links in the description of this podcast. All right, lads, lots I want to get to. We do have some Patreon questions. We want to make sure we hit those before we wrap up this episode. I want to talk downgrade targets. I want to talk about these mid-season role change players that we've seen and how historically important we know getting on new guys at the back end of the year with role changes, how important they are for us. I want to talk about our benches. I want to talk about the backline. I feel like that's defining a lot of teams and the moves they make this week and potentially next week as well. And then before we get to that, let's talk about the Gold Coast Suns and the Geelong Cats, the two new teams that are off the bye. There are now just 6 teams that don't have a bye for us. These next 2 weeks is when it gets interesting. Some premium pain being felt potentially both weeks for coaches that haven't made some good plans, but for most next week, almost regardless, are going to be fighting to get to 18, let alone anything above that. Let's talk about the Suns and the Cats. MiniMonk, let's talk about the Cats. There's not a plethora of options for people to look at. The one that non-owners might be considering is a guy that I think many astute coaches considered early in Tom Stewart when he came in a little bit cheap for us after a round 1 injury-affected game.
Yeah, I think that you've nailed it on the head. If you don't own Tom Stewart, he might be the number 1 target for coaches to upgrade into this week. And it's because he's a defender who's playing this week. And you're talking about those pain points for the next 2 weeks. If we look at it holistically, it's the defenders this week with the likes of Will Day, Jordan Dawson, and Nick Dacos being on the bye, Sicily being on the bye. These are the ones where a lot of, they're pretty popular picks as people consider them as top 6 defenders. And then next week, it's really the forwards. So we want to be looking for a defender that's particularly playing this week who comes in with perhaps a little bit of value, but is shown to be consistent. He's got the run home as well. I mean, the Cats have a lot of games at GMHB Hay from here until the end of the season, and it's no secret the form that Stewart's in when he plays down there versus when he plays anywhere else. So I think, if you don't own Stewart, I think he's arguably your number 1 target this week. But let's be real, a lot of coaches do own Stewart, and so the trickier part is there any other targets that are worth talking about at Geelong? And I think there's a couple that merit a bit of a conversation. We've got some return of injured players coming back. We've got Dangerfield's come back.
Yeah, Holmes is
coming in at a relatively cheap price. He's shown a massive ceiling in SuperCoach this year when he's been on the park. He's a pretty good player. He's one you could be interested in.
Yeah.
Jeremy Cameron plays as a key forward, but he doesn't play just as a key forward.
Correct.
He pushes up the ground really high. He gets involved in +6s. He even pushes back into the D50 and gets involved in some of the +6 junk that happens.
Yeah.
You don't see
he's got a 138 is in against Wiedering earlier in the year in AFL Fantasy at a 149. So good key position defenders aren't necessarily a reason to avoid him either.
Absolutely. He's the type of player that can really, go hard. People have started to look at the cheaper option in Tanner Bruhn. I don't think I would be going there now, not with the ins that Geelong have had. I think it makes it really scary to know what his role is. We saw that earlier on in the season where it's just very variable. And the one who might be the most interesting if you're really wanting to take a punt is it's Mitch Duncan. He is a phenomenal player when it's on his day. He's coming in at a sub 700k price tag in AFL Fantasy, and I think it's sub 500k in SuperCoach.
Yep.
He knows how to score when it's his turn to score. He has 140, 150 ceiling potential, and he can go on a stretch at 110, 120.
No doubt.
If he gets involved in it. And, we're talking before about Stewart being able to junk down at GMHBA. I think Duncan can as well. But the risk with Duncan is that his role isn't as certain as Stewart is week to week, and neither is his body.
Yep. I think that's an interesting take. Let's talk about Gold Coast then, because I agree there's not maybe much more from a Cat's perspective to look at. There's a few names that interest me, Rids, but there's one guy that I think has been really critical for coaches up until this point from Gold Coast, and I want to get your take on Bailey Humphrey, both in every angle around him. So it's broader than just is he a trade-in target this week, but it's how do coaches use him over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. So unpack some of your takes about Bailey Humphrey for me.
So first things first, I don't think you should be trading into Bailey Humphrey this week.
Great.
Across the formats. Let's just
Thank
make
you.
it absolutely
Thank
nail
you.
that down.
Yep.
Okay. He's a great player, but he's a first-year player, and he's crazy. You're not trading into him to be a keeper for the year. Correct. You're actually I don't know why you're trading into him. So let's just put that one to bed right now. Okay.
Good.
Now, the more interesting conversation with Bailey Humphrey is, when do I trade out of him? And how do I trade out of him, and where do I go? Up, down, sideways? And I threw that last option in because it's an intriguing option, sideways. Because we're going to talk about it a bit later on, but we've got options that are around the same price tag for in defence, in forwards. We've got players that have had role changes just recently.
DPP guys too.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we're going to have to work out the timing of that and work out their buys and how they fit your team. And it's going to be team specific, yeah?
Of course.
But is there any rookies coming through right now that are going to be there between now and the end of the year that generate enough cash? Probably not. So you can almost rule that out unless you're really, really adventurous in AF and you want to go to someone like a Windhager or a Robertson. But that doesn't have to be this week, yeah?
Yeah. Now,
there's a guy I haven't mentioned yet specifically, and I wanted to do this on purpose, and that's Nathan Fyfe. Now, this is the most interesting discussion in all the formats right now.
I agree.
Because you're banking good coin. In a year that we can't generate any cash on our benches, you can go a Humphrey to a Nathan Fyfe and bank good coin
in
and
all formats.
Another position. Yeah, that's across all three.
And
that's the interesting point of view now. Or if you can cash in somewhere and generate that little bit of cash, free it up, then you can put it on his head. And then suddenly you've got other options that come on the radar. And I'm talking about, let's look at Brad Crouch. Let's look at Lockie Neal. Let's look at some of these guys who are representative of value at their current price points across the formats.
Agree.
Like, I won't go Jack Steele yet. Until I can get sold that his body's right, I won't go Jack Steele just yet. But that does open up the door for a Brad Couch, yeah?
Yeah, if Steele's not, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's plenty of options out there and there's plenty of ways to do it. But make sure you're looking at every direction. Make sure what you can do. Like, do you have someone that's going on their buys? And I'm going to just throw out a Ben Hobbs, for instance. He's been an amazing pick. He's been scoring
great
well.
past month, yeah.
Rightio. But the fact of the matter is, it's his buy. We can actually put some money on his head. So does that mean a Humphrey to a Fyfe gives you enough coin to put on Hobbs' head to get you a true premium in? And this is why it's team specific, yeah?
Yeah.
So this is why I'm saying let's look at every option, but it doesn't have to be a one option. Look at the other person, the other part of that puzzle.
Well, you talked about this terminology about trade agility that you've been introducing, and it's a concept that fantasy coaches have known for a long time, but it's a nice terminology. And I think most would have looked at Bailey Humphrey as I'm going to run you through rounds 14 and 15, and then in 16, then I'll move him on. But you're introducing this new idea for people, which is, no, you can go as early as this week if it fits your team.
Yeah, because there's a narrative out there at the moment that I 100% disagree with, okay? And that's about numbers through the buys. Oh, we got to have 20, 21, 22. No, that means nothing if you've got a Mullen playing in round 12 who scores you 30.
That's right.
You know, and it doesn't matter if you've got 22 playing. If you've got 8 of them as rookies,
you're not scoring.
You're not going to score well in your best 18. So it all comes down, and we've said this, for the better part of 20 years, MJ. We should be maximising the points.
On field. Through the buys. So let's go into round 14 right now. Sure.
You might be looking good. You might have 19, 20, okay? But
which is a pretty common number for people, 19, 20 this week.
Yeah, but if you've only got 12 premiums, you're going to probably find yourself a little bit lower than the teams that have got 14, 15 premiums this week and may only have 18 or 19.
Or there are some teams that have 17 or 18 premiums this week.
Yeah, and it's the way that we should have been managing our buys since day one. We should always be getting an upgrade on the guy that we aren't comfortable with after their buy.
Correct.
So someone like a Bailey Humphrey, perfect, yeah?
Yeah.
There's
absolutely
no guarantee he's scoring over 40 or 50 or 60 this week. He's been playing awesome. His role's been great.
No, but you can't bank on more than that.
No, he's only a rook.
Yeah.
But if you can put 200,000 on his head and get you closer to 100 output guarantee, then that's a win anyway. And that's better than having, who's a common name? Let's say Josh Sin. Let's say Fyfe, okay?
Sheldrick. Like Sheldrick, this might be the better one because Parker's around. Sure.
We just don't know what these guys are doing. And there's a lot of volatility about their scoring, yeah? And I sort of stumbled my way through that, but I got there.
It was a volatile volatility. I liked what you were doing.
Mate,
it was good.
They could get 30, but they could get, like Johnson last week.
Yeah, it could go 90. Wardlaw the same.
90. Wardlaw, all the stars align. But guarantee you, people, don't expect 90 from Wardlaw this week if Simpkins back, if Greenwood's back, if LDU's back.
Yeah, no chance.
There's a chance, but it's
I'm saying no chance, but that's fine.
Yeah, it's a less chance than what it was last week when he was playing predominantly the main guy in the midfield.
Correct. 100% correct.
As the season goes on, you need to be more willing to flip rookies before they hit what you would believe to be their maximum price.
Fattened out, yeah.
Exactly. You've got to be able to be willing to move them on at the point when it benefits your team the most, when you can make the upgrade off of them. And people might look at Humphrey and be like, oh, well, he's got a nice couple of fixtures. He's got, Carlton at the MCG this week, and he's got Hawthorn next week. Flip him at round 16 before he comes into the tougher run of, Collingwood, Port Adelaide.
That's fine.
But if you want to match the fixture, why not go to one of the other Gold Coast Suns players? We've got a couple of pretty juicy midfield targets that exist inside of that team in Anderson and Rowell.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to keep that flexibility there, if you want to still punt that fixture, it's only 300K to get up to Rowell. It's 350 to get up to Anderson. It's not a huge amount of coin.
No.
So explore those options as well. Like Rids is giving you the options and saying, well, why don't you look about going down? Because someone like Fyfe is an interesting option. You could sideways, probably not this week, but maybe after his bye, to someone like Himmelberg, someone like Keays off of his bye as well.
Yep.
These are interesting options, but it's always about what you can do as a culmination of your trades, not just about the one. You've got to look at the whole set.
Yeah.
if I downgrade Humphrey to a 200k player, what can I do on the other end with, like a Hobbs? Can I take Hobbs all the way up to a top end premium?
A Brayshaw. Let's just put a name on it for the sake of a name. Yeah.
Or if I go sideways, do I want to also go sideways with someone like Hobbs and use this as a way to generate points on field and get a bit of cash generation on field as well? Because Rich said it pretty clearly. There aren't a lot of rookies that look like making a lot of cash. We look at someone like Sheldrick last week. He had a really good score, but as he talked about in the week leading up to it, Mills and Parker were out of that mix. And yes, they're playing Heaney and Papley through there as well, but who's to say they won't keep doing that now that Parker comes in and Sheldrick just gets shoved to the half forward line like he did last time?
If not the sub, yeah.
Exactly. Or someone like Sin, he's flirting with being on the precipice of best 22. He's keeping their captain out at the moment, but how long is that going to last? Or, is a Marek for West Coast going to be a good long-term scorer to generate cash? He's playing key forward in the team that's on the bottom of the ladder. Chances are 45 is about his ceiling. So, it's looking dire for cash generation on rookies. Why not look at the ones where there actually is cash generation opportunities, i.e. players that have done it before and have a low break even that you can kind of trust the roll with a bit more.
Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of that play right throughout this year too, in terms of the way we're paying up, quote unquote, for the guys that are going to generate us income. So again, it's not a new idea we've seen introduced this year, but it's a new timing of being able to do that this point in time of the year. You brought up this interesting point, MiniMonk, around the fixture and Gold Coast. And so, Rids, I'm keen on your take on a couple of those Suns midfielders that MiniMonk's alluded to. First, you've got Anderson from round 4 to 8 this year. He went in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam in that stretch of time, 126, and he went at 133 in SuperCoach. While we talk about Rao, since round 5, he's got 6 SuperCoach tons, 2 of them over 155, nothing under 85, while in DreamTeam and Fantasy in that stretch of time since round 5, 4 tons, a 124, a 142, a bunch of other 90s scores. Are either of these guys people you could look at? I know it's always format and team dependent, but are either of these guys people you should look at, or should we be looking to go all the way up to the top of the tree?
No, don't do that. Don't do that, MJ. You know I hate this discussion. You're just absolutely killing me right now.
I'm just poking the bear.
Oh, yeah. Like, let's forget all the value opportunities we've got now. Let's just go get Clary Oliver now because he's dropped 15,000 on his starting point. Like, that's great. Let's do that. Nah, like Noah Anderson, absolutely, seriously, he's
an option. He's an option.
He has to be. Yeah, he's played in Cairns the last 2 weeks or wherever it was, Darwin. Where did they play? Darwin?
Yeah, Darwin, and he basically went back-to-back tons.
And he went 90 and 109 in AF and DreamTeam, and he went to slightly more double hundreds. Like, he's back. He's back to normal playing conditions, and he's had a break. So even if he was carrying something, he's probably had a bit of a rest. He's copped a bit of attention as well.
Sure.
He's working his way through it. But this guy's got ceiling, He's got ceiling for days. Plus, he's one of those guys, and we've said this many, many times over many, many years, MJ. Get someone you like to watch.
Yeah.
Like, how much more enjoyable is it picking a guy that you actually like to play football? Noah Anderson, he doesn't stop running from the first bounce to the last siren.
Gets it done on the inside, the outside, defensive stuff with tackles.
And he's silky, and he moves, and he's great to watch. And so let's have a bit of fun with this.
And maybe cheap.
Well, yeah, correct. Like, if you don't like a certain colour hair, if you don't like someone being too hard on the inside, then maybe it is. Anderson's your man, okay?
Yeah.
But I've got a man crush, and I'm not going to tell anyone that I don't, on Matty Rowell.
Oh, no, you do.
Oh, yeah, you do.
Matty Rowell is the most contested beast animal I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, he's a freak.
Yeah. But he would be DT and AF for days if he could find a little bit more outside ball.
Which he is this year.
Well, yeah, but he's not quite tipped it over yet. But, I love watching his attack on the ball. I love watching the attack on the man. Any guy that can do 15, 20 tackles in a game of football, I just love that stuff.
Yeah, it's
like,
cool.
it's awesome, yeah?
Yeah. All right. Well, both of those are viable options, depending on your format, your team, your positioning, where it is. I think a lot of people are looking at the pain point of the back line this week. And there's a number of elements for it. And I'll caveat
So just,
and then I'll leave you to
MJ,
go.
before you go any further, I just want to make one more point on Bailey Humphrey, okay?
Please.
If you were upgrading a Ben Hobbs this week, okay, and you weren't looking at upgrading a Bailey Humphrey and you've got 19 on your field already, well, aren't you doing the same thing? And if you're struggling around 15, but you're trading out the better option out of the two for round 15, if that's the round that you're going to actually have a problem with.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
No, I think that's really helpful for people. So as well as that, let's talk about the backs. It's the pain point for multiple reasons. Number one, outside of Dawson and Dacos, there's nobody really banging the door down consistently in that. I know some would say Sicily's there, but at time of recording, and unfortunately for the Sicily owners, you're going to have to make a decision on trade or keep based on the fact that his tribunal review isn't until the conclusion of this upcoming round. So for Hawthorn, no problem. For the fantasy community, the review means nothing to you. It is not helping you whatsoever in your decision. So I'm taking him out of it. So top two defenders are really clear. Then it starts to enter in a different phasing across the format. So that's one point in time. Second, we've only had, even though it's 2 weeks of buys, just 6 teams have had buys in that period of time. So we don't have the plethora of options that we've historically had. Third point, most of the premium defenders and or stepping stone to close to premium defenders we've had this year have been there, and the cows as well. So the Weddells, the Mitchells, I'm going to throw Day as that stepping stone in that as well. And then we're running out of trades. We throw all these things in a big mixing pot. We throw the generating cash we've got in the back line. We throw the lack of options, and it then starts to look for the community at, I've already got Tom Stewart. What else do I do? And based in most people's eyes, MiniMonk, they've seen one premium defender they don't own get a ton last week. And so regardless of any other ideas, a lot of people are just going, it's Jack Sinclair or bust. So your take on that summation and on Jack Sinclair as a target?
Well, let's go with Jack Sinclair as a target first.
Sure.
A lot of coaches were worried last week about the Ryan Clark tag.
Yes.
Understandably. And fair enough too. He did spend a bit of time on him, but Sinclair was all class. Sinclair played a really, really good game. And he was arguably one of the best on ground. And so I think he is a really good target because he comes in at a price which is down on what he's done in last year. He's got a good score. His break-even's reset, and he's got a good run. So, yeah, I don't think it's as simple as saying it's Sinclair or bust, but I think he should be, as we talked about with Stewart, if you probably own Stewart, Sinclair's your option. If you don't own Stewart, Stewart's an option. If you don't own either of them, there's 2 premium upgrades you could go for.
Yeah.
But it's a pain point because people don't want to upgrade to round 15 defenders, round 15 by defenders, because, who wants to bring in a premium when they're going to be missing the next game? It's really tricky.
Well, and they're jumping off Sheasel and Zeeble already in consideration this week.
Exactly. And so I'm going to use AFL Fantasy because it's nice and easy. If we look at the players that have averaged more than 90 for the year that don't have the round 14 or the round 15 bye, there is Luke Ryan at the top of that list.
Hooray.
Then it's Jack Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
Lockie Weller, who's injured, might be coming back.
Yep.
Jake Lloyd. Tom Stewart. And then it's Hayden Young. These aren't exactly names that scream out to you, pick me. And I've deliberately left the list short there because there's another player who's averaging just under what Hayden Young's playing, just under what Hayden Young's averaging, who has been getting not a lot of love this year when he's been playing really, really well, in Nazaya Wanganeen-Millera. So a lot of the reason why Sinclair hasn't been performing quite as much is because he's had to be sharing the role. And he's been sharing it with Wanganeen-Millera, who's quietly averaging 87 for the year and has put together a string of some pretty good games over the last few weeks. I mean, if you look at his last three, it's 107, 81, 118.
And again, that's AFL Fantasy. It's very paralleled, similar in SuperCoach.
Very parallel in SuperCoach. You were talking about a 100 averaging defender who has the same run as someone like Sinclair. So if you need to make 2 defender upgrades this week, why not go there? Why not go to the guy who can match the ceiling and can match the consistency of Sinclair, what we've seen this season?
Yeah.
But the trickier part is that most people want to wait to slot out the defender line. Most people want to wait on someone like Doherty, someone like, I guess, Dale or Caleb Daniel, who have both shown that they could be pushing top 6 now.
A value pick in Himmelberg, who the coach has now come out and said will play back for the end of the year. So people have kind of eyes lighting up about, he did that last year. He scored like a premium. He won't be priced out at money.
Yeah. And I think Himmelberg's another discussion because I don't think it's quite as simple as he did it last year. He can do it again this year.
It's very different. I agree.
But if we look at that, why not fill it out with someone who's going to make 50, 60, 70K in these next 2 rounds, who has a favorable 2-round fixture, and then just sideways them at round 16? Like, I know this is a very AFL fantasy specific play, but if you're staring down the barrel of only 2 or 3 green dots in your backline this week, it's probably something you have to do, because lost in the discussion about all of the premiums being on the bye or being injured or suspended is the fact that there aren't many defender rookies that are playing.
No.
Chess is on his bye. Mullen's out injured. You know,
Constable in Dream Team and SuperCoach.
Constable in DreamTeam and fantasy and SuperCoaches. Exactly. So if you're fielding 4 green dots down back this week, you're probably doing pretty well, because it's an absolute minefield down there. So yeah, look for those types of options.
Rids, I'm
MJ,
curious. Yes.
I want to talk about one guy in particular.
Yes, please.
I want to talk about Jake Lloyd.
Yes, I'm interested in him.
Last week, I was worried about his ceiling, okay? And I still am, to a point.
Sure.
But that last quarter, and I don't know whether everyone actually paid attention or not, but Blakey went off injured, got subbed out of the game, and then suddenly Horse decided that he would push Jake Lloyd back to his
halfback flanker back to the
role.
halfback flank, not off the wing. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did Jake Lloyd do, MJ? He came out and went berserk.
Yeah.
He was the Jake Lloyd of old, yeah?
Yeah. Taking kick-ins, taking intercept marks, taking transition marks, ball being played all through him.
I just want to talk about AF for 1 second. Round 15 is going to be the hardest fixture, okay? It's going to be the hardest round for our teams to negotiate with the best 18 through the bye.
I agree.
Who do you reckon Sydney play in round 15?
It's a pretty decent matchup, mate.
So if you're comfortable with this and you're not looking for a season-long premium defender option, why not make it? Look, I'm undecided about everyone else. It doesn't really suit me to trade into a round 14 guy this week, a round 15 guy. Like, I don't want to make it harder. Why not play the matchup game for round 15, the hardest round of the year to negotiate?
That's West Coast Eagles he's alluding to, by the way, listeners, if you're not sure who he's pulling
it
out
might
there.
actually get bigger and better.
Richmond
if
and
Blakey
Bulldogs
does miss,
are a little bit later
if
on too.
Blakey does miss, at least this week, maybe a couple of weeks. I know he's a test at the moment, and they're saying that he may play with the ankle. But let's just say hypothetically, if he does miss, that means Lloyd has that halfback role absolutely guaranteed to be his. But there is the world, and we've seen him do this, Lloyd, with Blakey in the team anyway.
Well, I think Lloyd move to the wing had nothing to do with Blake. He obviously went back there. It's more to do with the lack of other midfield options they've got rolling through the round.
There is potentially. That's exactly what's happened. So with a Parker coming in, then suddenly other players who are playing inside to cover people like a Sheldrick could then be pushed, move out on the outside. You know, there's a whole world of that. Okay. But if you firmly believe Horst Longmire is going to play him as half back, and if you're able to have a look at teams tomorrow and just see whether Blakey's named or not,
Sure.
because, I mean, that's another variable, okay?
Oh, absolutely.
If he's not named, he's absolutely a consideration, yeah?
Oh, definitely. And he's been close enough, like I said, outside of Dawson and Dacos. Sicily, sure, let's throw him in when he's been available. He's up there for scoring. But beyond that, there's a reasonable amount of separation between D4 and the pack.
Now, I just wanted to give it a level balance because I thought last week that I was probably a bit cool on Lloyd. He is actually a viable option.
Sure.
But if you don't know anyone else, you just got to decide. Now, he might not be viable in Dream Team and SuperCoach because we're running out of trades. Let's be honest.
Yeah, he's not a runner. If you're grading him, it's because you're happy to have him for the majority of the year.
Yeah, but he might slide to a D6 and you might be happy to have an 85
Take a 90,
average.
85, 95 range, yeah.
You know, and if you're going to go to a Yeo or a Himmelberg or whoever it is anyway at D6, then that might,
extra week
that might be enough, yeah?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. And I think in a very similar vein, we actually need to put the games of Hayden Young and Luke Ryan into context.
We do.
It was a wet game.
That was a
It
disastrous,
was a very, very
especially from like midway through the second quarter to start of the last. It was pure wet weather footy.
Exactly. And so what a coincidence that Freo weren't able to chip it around as much and the mark numbers for the game dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Young and Ryan were able to get involved with that a bit more, but, you know, in the wet, it's very hard for defenders to get very good scores, no matter how good the matchup is. But you need to put the context into what their matchups are coming up. Mm-hmm. Their next three are GWS at Giants Stadium, Essendon at Optus, and the Dogs under the roof.
Perfect.
Pretty friendly run for defenders. And,
yeah,
you know, there's every chance that those two go at a 90 to 95 click for the next 3 weeks, and that sees you out to the end of the bye. So you even get another week to go because the Dogs matchup in round 16 is typically the one that you tend to target.
Yep.
People are making it out like it's doom and gloom down back, that none of these options are players that you can really pick. But they don't put the context behind the scores that they had the previous week. And this is always the thing that you need to consider. You need to consider the context of the players that you are trading out. Why are you trading them out? Are they maxed out in price? Have they had a role change? Are they not looking fit? Mm-hmm. And who are the players you're trading in? Do they have the role? Do they have the matchups? Do they have the potential to outperform the price that they're at? Mm-hmm. Or are they a captaincy option and you're happy to pay up? Or are you trying to match, you know, the teams around you because a player is 99% owned and you want to be the last one in that bunch to make sure that you don't get burnt by them in the future? Players like Young and Ryan aren't heavily owned. Neither is Lloyd.
No.
Neither is Nazai Wanganeen-Miller. Sinclair went up last week in his ownership across the formats, but he's still relatively low. Expected to spike this week.
I agree.
But someone like Stewart's nearly 100% owned in upper ranks across the formats because he came into a cheaper price because of the injury he had earlier in the season, because he had the bye. You want to take him on with one of these types.
I love that. I really love that. There's two guys.
I just want to say one more
please.
thing. Look at the Richmond defenders, okay, the halfbacks. Rioli last week only scored 80 and Dayton Sword scored 100. Like,
well, he's midfield only, but he's playing a halfback role again. I understand what you're trying to say.
He played full-time halfback last week.
Yes, correct.
So look at the scores relative. Like, that means Young's 79, 80, whatever it is, isn't that bad last week.
No, and Vlosten scored like 40, 50 points in the last quarter when it was back to relatively dry conditions.
Exactly. So you just got to put it into perspective a little bit.
I like that. So there's 3 other defenders that I think are worth a conversation about before we move on to anything else. One, I think we could breeze through pretty easily, and that's Sheasel. I think the vast majority of the community, now everyone's different, are probably thinking, it's this week or next week I'm trading him. He's done his job. I'm moving him on. I'm open to hearing different thought processes around that. But the vast majority of coaches, if they didn't do it last week, it's either this or next week. So we can probably campus him as his own island. But there's 2 other guys I'm interested in. Zeeble and Will Day. Will Day, probably more in SuperCoach, is getting a push to trade him out. That's the format the most, and part of that's because outside of the 109 last week against Brisbane, you've got to go back to round 4 for the last of his only 3 tons for the year. So I could empathise with why he's getting the push of trade out. But across the formats, and then I want to talk about Zeeble in a sec, but let's focus on Will Day for a moment. Been one of the best money makers for us of the year as a mid-pricer. That got stalled a little bit with around 5 and 6 out with suspension. Talk to me about Will Day. If you're an owner, MiniMonk, does it depend on where you are ranked? Does it depend on which format you're in, what trades you have? Or is it a combination of all about whether he's a hold or a trade?
I think it's always a combination of everything, and it's always team specific. But I might start off with the SuperCoach perspective, because I think that I think it's being missed a bit. So if we look at his last 5 weeks before this one, he had Fremantle, Melbourne, West Coast, St Kilda, and Port Adelaide, which, on paper, it's probably about even. But if we look at that middle 2 in West Coast and St Kilda, he got tags in both of those games. Not just small tags, pretty big tags. And even in the Port Adelaide one, he got a tag as well. He was sent a lot of attention over the last few weeks. And then the 2 before that against Melbourne and Fremantle, they aren't the easiest midfielders to score against because they're very big-bodied midfielders.
And he is not, yeah.
And he is not. But if we take just those 2 games, just the West Coast and St Kilda game out, every other game aside from round 1, he has gone over 80. And he has a ceiling. Like, we've seen his ceiling earlier this year. He won 139 in SuperCoach against North Melbourne. Yes, it's a North Melbourne matchup, but good news.
Still the ceiling.
He plays them again in 4 weeks, and he plays them again in 4 weeks' time. And who does he play the week after? He plays Richmond. So, if he ends up at D6 for you in SuperCoach, it's not the end of the world, because you've missed his peak price now as well.
Yeah, that's true.
He's 445k. He doesn't have a lot of cash on his head, but he has the potential to be a D6 and maybe only be 5 points off the marker from here until the end of the season. And the season where we're crying out for every ounce of value we can and saving trades in every position we can, his flexibility with his DPP and his ability to potentially max it with the top 6 is enough. And I like to think that argument probably holds true in Dream Team as well. And I think in AF, it might be slightly different because the fact that you have the access to trades through the season. But if we look at his next 5 weeks, it's Gold Coast, Carlton, GWS, North Melbourne, and Richmond. And even the week after, it's St Kilda.
Pretty good for midfielders.
It's a pretty good run for midfielders. So there's a world where you trade him out in AFL Fantasy, but I don't think that it's this week. Unless you are in a position where you absolutely have to trade a defender because you've got no one playing down back, and he's the one that you're less likely to keep because, Dawson and Dacos are top 6 defenders. You're not going to trade those 2.
Sure.
That's about the only time I think that it's a viable play.
Yep, it's good. Your take, Rids, on Day across the formats as a trade out option?
No, I want to do Day and Zeeble at the same time, but I'm going to be loose. Okay?
Yep, of course you are.
What has changed with Day and what has changed with Zeeble since day 1?
With Day? Nothing.
No, well, Day's sort of, he's drifting back a little bit. He's playing midfield. He's playing
every now and then he's floating back.
Nothing's changed yet. Sure. He's still getting possessions. He's still playing great.
Yep.
What's happened with Zeeble? Nothing. He had a terrible game 2 weeks ago, but they didn't move him forward. They didn't drop him. He still played the junkie role that whatever he's playing, who knows what that role is, but he's still playing it. Nothing's actually changed from these 2 guys, yeah?
No.
So we've always said in pre-season, what's the number one thing you love to say, MJ? It's not about the score, it's about the role. It's not about. It's
not a bad impression. That's not bad. That's pretty good.
That's what you do all day, every day.
That's pretty much all the 50 most relevant is. Yeah. It's
so in the preseason, I'll tell everyone a secret. He's either doing his hair or he's talking about role. That's all he does. He goes around to strangers in the street. He tells, did he have the same role? Did he have the right role? That's all he does. I speak to
my wife and kids.
But the fact of the matter is, we're trading out of guys who are actually scoring very, very well.
Oh, maybe if they've got the role.
In the position that we aren't really flush with many big premiums. It doesn't
Are
make
you trading
sense,
into something that's going to score exactly what they are for the rest of the year?
And I liked that you parked Sheasel because there is another conversation about Sheasel because he is a first-year rook.
Correct.
Okay.
And he's also the one that has had something change.
Correct.
So do we want to talk about him?
Yeah, I'll start it. He's been moved into the midfield.
Yeah.
And not only that, he's also been pushing forwards. But they've been missing some of their midfield brigade. Greenwood's been out and Simpkin's been out. They're probably coming back this week.
Correct.
Might be interesting to see what happens to Sheasel's role with them back in, but I think that they like what they're doing with that midfield mix. You know, you were talking before about Wardlaw's output probably decreasing when those two come back in.
Sure.
Yeah, it gets a bit less of a CBA rotation, probably has to spend a bit more time on half forward.
Sure.
It's pretty common role for a rookie to do. They might try and do the same thing with Sheasel, give him a bit of exposure all around the ground.
Yeah.
But if that happens with those two coming back in, and he's a first-year rookie playing inside midfield, yeah, that's when you've got to abort ship.
Yeah.
Because he is priced very, very highly across the formats. 95s price points, which is really good for a rookie.
Yeah.
But if he starts getting tired and starts having to play a mid-half forward role, that price is going to plummet quick. Now, I don't think it's this week that you jump off because you have to see it first.
Correct.
And also because if you haven't traded out of him, you need him for this round 14 buy because of how bad it is down back.
Yep.
But if you see the role change this week, you need to be aborting ship in round 15, I think.
Yeah. 100%. And that's the whole point, because there's another factor. If Aaron Hall stays in that team, he is definitely playing that half-back role. So that makes it even more of a giveaway that Sheasel's likely to go forward, because in the pre-season, we know that Sheasel played all his junior football, not as a back. This is the first time he's ever played as a back is in the AFL.
It was an experiment in their pre-season match. It was like, oh, that looked okay. Let's run with it. And it's lasted for the better part of half a year.
But this guy's a superstar, yeah? In a team that's struggling and that's really screaming out for positives. And they've got two kids here that you could build pretty much a premiership team around in future years. They're not going to burn him out when they're having a bottom four team, for a year. They're going to actually give this kid as much exposure, as much cushioning and everything else, because he is going to play as a forward, pushing into the midfield. He is going to play that role moving forward.
He's even said as much as to the club, if you go and check out through what some of the things they've been saying in North Melbourne media, he's been saying, look, happy to play wherever the coach wants me, but I think I'm at my greatest impact with my skills as a centre forward, midfielder forward. That's where I can be damaging scoreboard impact, score involvements. And I think long term, that's probably where he ends up based on his ability to change the determination of an outcome of a game. That's probably where he ends up. But for a development, no worries. But I think you're right, MiniMonk.
There's a lot of parallels to him as to kind of what Rosie and Butters did, where they exploded at the start of the season. They both started really well in their first season. They tailed off in the second half. They had a couple of years of plateauing, and then look at them now.
Booming in their desired spots. Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities there in terms of the way they play, the way they attack the ball, their builds, their style. You know, he's been a good ride, but don't get too much emotional attachment. Yes, he's a good player, but if he's not doing the job that you need him to anymore, it's time to move on.
That's good. So there's this terminology and phrase that people that have played fantasy footy across formats have become familiar with at this point in time of the year, and it's throwing a bench spot. In essence, trading into a basement price guy, predominantly that has DPP for the purposes of creating in-squad versatility, knowing that they're very unlikely to play, although sometimes you can get a little bit lucky and that happens. But really, you're just trying to maximize every cent of cash that players have generated and put it onto the field with premium upgrade maneuvers. And you sacrifice a D8, an M10 or an M11 if you play DreamTeam and SuperCoach. Most coaches have already sacrificed R3. That's my only caveat that I'll say there. They've got a Madden or a Heath through there for the most part. I know some are running Breeks through some formats and really making some money. That caveat's there for this question. When is it time for us to throw a bench spot to get a permanent red dot?
This is not a normal year. We're already thrown a bench spot in every position. If you go look at your defense line right now, everyone, D8, who is it? I guarantee
MiniMonk alluded to it. It's Mullen, it's Chesser, it's Constable.
It's going to be a red dot. Go have a look at your F8. You've already used all the cash. You've already milked them. There's no ability to do it this year unless you've kept that bench hygiene up that I've been talking about over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And you've been able to add. And you've got a Sheldrick who you've fallen into at, say, F8, who may get 2 or 3 and might get to 300,000. But what about an Engwin? Engwin's a perfect scenario. If he's running at your M8, you could swing him into your F8 potentially and then kill him. But it's tricky this year, MJ, because we don't have the bench rooks.
Yeah, and coaches are also, some that have traded into a Darcy Cameron over the past few weeks and now potentially with that versatility that they want to create are also looking at flipping into that. Well, I can't have too many dead forward spots because I want the versatility of making a Madden or a Heath my dead spot there to move Cameron as coverage. So you're right. So MiniMonk, what's your take on this?
I think it's tricky. As Riz has really succinctly said, chances are we're running a lot of dead rooks already. But the problem comes not with how many dead rooks you have in your team. It's what are the viable options that you can downgrade into that are going to make cash from here. And Rids has kind of said Sheldrick might get 2 or 3 games, but if he only gets to 300k, is that extra 18k maybe more useful for you this week compared to next week? These are the types of questions you need to ask. Have you got someone like Angwin who, he's only made 120k, but at least he's a green dot who's sitting there for the time being, holding his spot? Or is it someone like Chesser who might keep coming in and out of the team? I mean, yes, they're red dots, but they're not red dots in the same way that, Max Heath is a red dot or Charlie Constable is a red dot, where they're never coming into the team. These are red dots that might come into the team at some spot. And throwing these sorts of positions and scraping that 80 to 100k in AFL fantasy, because chances are if you're throwing a spot this time of the year in SuperCoach and DreamTeam, you're probably throwing it at the round 15 buy, going down to one of those 102k players, taking as much cash as you can and using it to get your final upgrades. But in AFL fantasy, that 80k or that 120k that you can generate by going down to a red dot can be really useful from going like someone like, I don't know, a Bailey Smith to a Caleb Sarong after the buys, or a Hayden Young to a Sam Doherty after the buys.
Yeah.
That's when you've got to look at it. Like, if you don't need the numbers for the next 2 weeks, you reckon you're going to get 20 playing, you're pretty confident about your rookies, then throw the spot. Like, make the cash, take the risky play, because if you've already got someone like Sheldrick, you can wait the weekend Marek. Just look at it. Consider it as an option. Take that extra 15k that you might not get if you go to someone like Kassin who doesn't have great job security.
Yeah, I don't mind that. So we're talking about these downgrade options. Let's look at a couple of the names that over these next couple of weeks coaches might be looking at and seeing. You've got Sheldrick this week. Again, we're recording this on a Wednesday evening, so outside of Port Adelaide and Geelong players, the rest of the side we don't know, but probably did enough to at least find himself in the 23, if nothing else. You've got Fyfe from the Giants. Now, there are some returning guys coming back, but probably looked the best he has from what he's done recently. Johnson certainly got a bump for us, but he's not really in that downgrades price point for a lot of people, unless they're coming up from a really fattened cow and doing some of the trades that we alluded to early there. Marich at West Coast looked fine, looked good. only caveat I'll say is their other best key position forward had to go down and play back from halfway through the second quarter. So how much of that is a true narrative, we're not really too sure. Harrison at Collingwood has been all right, but injury has created opportunity for him to get through there. You've got Banks, who's close at Richmond to getting a game, but he's, again, at time of recording, not been named. You've got a Warner at Fremantle, who, again, he's been close at waffle level, but you've also got an Erasmus. I know they're not the same players, but in terms of pressure on the 23, you've got these guys, and maybe you could throw one or two there. I know that sounds like a lot of names, but I feel like I'm throwing a lot of, and Mullen off injury, I just feel like I'm throwing in a lot of guys that are just as likely to get dropped the following week as much as
All I heard you
else.
saying was you got 30, you got 40, you can have 25, you can have 33, you can have 38. That's all I heard you saying, MJ.
There's not really anything you feel super comfortable if for whatever reason you had to field for a week or two and making you much money based on that point that Rids has just made in terms of low volume of points. Is it as bad as we're making it out to be? Or is there some upside that we can kind of help the fantasy community as we're looking at one of the hardest years to generate cash? I know you guys have been leading the community in a lot of areas of championing ways of doing it. But of these cows of varying forms, is it just as bleak and we've just got to adapt and make it work? Or is there something that we might be able to see as a positive light coming?
How many of these cows do you realistically see making, let's say in AFL Fantasy, 100K or more from here within, say, 5 weeks? Maybe, what, Johnson and Sheldrick?
Yeah, and that's purely because they're coming off good scores last week.
Exactly. But none of the others are going to make 100K from here. Even if Marriott stays in the team from here until the end of the season, there's every chance that his price never makes it above 300K.
At best, he does what Angwin has done and maybe just squeaks over.
Yeah. And let's be real. He is the rookie in that group that has the most job security.
I agree with that.
And then the rookie that's probably got the next most amount of job security is Johnson. Yeah. And the problem is he's got the highest prize tag, all of them. And his spike score last week came in conditions that suited him when the other inside midfielder was missing.
Yeah.
There was no Jager O'Meara in that team. It was wet. So what did he do? He tackled a lot and got a lot of contested pill.
Yep.
Now, he could continue to do that because if you've watched him play, like I watched him very closely in the Brisbane game, he was really good. And if he didn't have that brain fart where he did a dangerous tackle on Dane Zorko, he easily could have kept running in our teams doing 75, 80s for 6 weeks and hit 550K by now. But let's put him to the side because he's probably the separate one to talk about. All of the others, they smell vesty and they smell dropped. Yep. You cannot trade into any of them with any confidence that they're going to be here in 2 weeks' time. Harrison, the troops are coming back for the Pies post-bye, and he's around 15 forward.
Giants.
Sheldrick, he's got, as we said, Mills and Parker coming back into the team. It's scary. Faye, the troops are coming back as well. And all the others, they didn't play last week. So
or haven't played at all yet. Yeah. Yeah.
So why not? And this barriers into that conversation we're talking about before about throwing a spot. Why not throw to a 200K player who might come into the team, who has a scoring pedigree, who could, make you 100K in 3 weeks if they last in the team for 3 weeks?
Yeah.
And how about this, MJ?
Yes.
Sorry, MiniMonk, you finish off your point.
I was going to say there was one that you mentioned to me earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Buller.
Yep.
He's a player, 200K. He's got scoring pedigree. We saw it last week in the Waffle. Sorry, not in the Waffle, in the VFL. He comes in, plays 3 games at 70. He probably makes 100K.
Yep, I agree.
So, MJ, there's always players. There's always ways to generate cash. Yes. Now, let's look at AF, specifically.
Sure.
So it's a little bit different because we got the 2 trades a week, use them, lose them, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't need to tell everyone about, because if you're listening to us, you know how to play the game. So, but take a haircut on some guys. Go to a guy who's likely to make you 100,000, 150,000, and then take him up a level. So this is what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. We used to call it taking a ride,
Yep.
But look at an Elliot Yeo who can do that. Look at a Ben Keays last week who can do that. Look at, let's just throw out another name, Jack Crisp. He's potentially someone that's going to make you 100,000 if he keeps playing that role for a few weeks, while De Goey's out.
Yeah.
Like, why not be very creative and look at certain guys, but make sure their fixtures and everything else aligns?
Sure, all the stuff we always tell you. Yep.
Rightio. But don't be closed-minded, okay? Last week, we only spoke about 2 guys in particular. We spoke about Callum Ward and we spoke about Ben Keays.
Yeah.
Both of them went up and generated quite a bit of cash. Look at a Kieran Briggs the last 2 weeks.
It's got the role.
He's making some serious coin. He's made 250,000 in 2 weeks in Dream Team.
Yeah, he's been huge.
And, we highlighted this. You can trade into him at R3. And you know what that does now, though? If you did trade into him at R3,
well,
and
it
I
gives
know
you 2
this,
options.
you could trade out English at nearly $1 million, have Briggs at your R3, and still have a Cameron to cover him anyway.
Well, that's right. If you've got that option, it actually could be a play. Yeah.
It is 100% a play. So you can go in and grab your whoever. Noah Anderson, okay, in your midfield and still bank 100.
You could get Clayton Oliver next week if you really wanted to do that. If you have Cameron, it creates options, or you can trade Briggs out at his buy, throw your Heath or Madden back there, and he's made you 350K.
There's ways to do this, yeah. Elliot Lowe scored 120 odd last week in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
If he's not the number 1 traded into defender next week in SuperCoach, I'd be very, very surprised.
Well, it's probably him or Himmelberg, to be fair, that SuperCoach.
Well, I don't think anyone would be traded into Himmelberg next week because he'll have to buy this week after. So next week, I think it's Yeo, yeah? And that's the sort of stuff you need to. Now, we talk about it playing the break-even game and having trade agility and do this and do. But the fact of the matter is, if you're looking for someone who's proven in the format and who represents value, for some reason in AF, we hunt value all year, and then as soon as the buy hits, we don't hunt anymore. We decide we're not even looking anymore at value. We're just going to jump on the top.
Yeah.
But let's be absolutely honest, MJ. There are great options, yeah? Darcy Cameron 2 weeks ago was an outstanding option.
Yep.
And he still will be an option.
Still is next week.
100%. And these guys are great options. Now, Keays might be a slightly different conversation because you might have to play the long game in Dream Team and SuperCoach to get that benefit. Because I'm with you. I think he tags Dacos next week.
I think the positive of that is we've seen Dacos, as the year goes on, be more in the mids. I suppose the outcome is Keays is more than comfortable to go with Dacos wherever he goes.
But there are options out there. There's always options. It's just you need to open your eyes and explore the options. I only said Nathan Fyfe a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
We're talking about someone who's sub 400,000 in Dream Team. He's 449,000 in
sub 300 in SuperCoach.
He's cheap.
He is very cheap, and his break evens, I wouldn't say it's absolute must have now, but it's low. He's going to make some money.
Importantly, probably look the best I've seen him look in terms of his presence and ability to impact the game for almost 2 years.
But the other thing that I noticed on the weekend was Freo were in a bit of trouble. They needed to do something slightly different. So what did they go to? They went to Nathan Fyfe in the last quarter, and he went straight into the midfield in that last quarter. And that's the best I've seen him look for years.
I agree.
So that should give you a bit of and who's a SuperCoach gun, MJ?
Nat Fyfe's got 120 capacities all day.
And so if he slides down to your F6, M9 swing or F7, M9 swing guy to cover you on the benches while generating a few dollars along the way, happy days, yeah?
To me, he's the perfect coverage of swing for you in that SuperCoach format. Absolutely, he is. I totally agree with that. Want to hit our Patreon questions before we wrap up this podcast. If you want to become a Patreon, all the details are in the podcast description of this link. Let's go to Wayno's question. It does echo a little bit of what you were talking about earlier, MiniMonk. So keen on your thoughts. He's looking for a 2 to 3 week play. He is already an owner of Sinclair and Stewart. And so he's looking at those two of Wanganeen, Miller and Duncan. Are those the two leaders, or is there anybody else that Wayno could be considering?
I think for a 2 week play, I really do think Wanganeen Miller is a good option.
Yeah.
Like, we were all looking at the likes of Crouch, Steele, and Sinclair last week, and Sinclair especially was kind of like, oh, let's wait a week until after the Clark tag happens. Their run is good. And they're a good team. And they've been using him in that distributing type role. So I'd probably be leaning to Wanganeen Miller out of the two. And I think that, I don't think there really are that many other viable alternatives if you're looking to generate points and looking to generate cash.
4 tons since round 7 for Wanganeen Miller, 752, has got ceilings of 118, 125 in there. Richmond, Brisbane, West Coast in his next 3. So 2 of those are really nice matchups.
I just want to talk about Mitch Duncan here for a second. I'm just going to show you. This is the 2 worlds of Mitch Duncan, Rodio.
Oh, no.
His lowest score against Port Adelaide in AF and Dream Team is a 1. Okay. And he's played many games, so don't worry about that.
That's an injury-affected game.
His highest score is 116. You just got to be accepting that that's the risk you're buying into, and that you could get a 3 out of him at any stage, but you could get 120 out of him at any stage. So that's the trade agility. That's the risk profile in your team. You have to look at your team. If you've got 2 or 3 of those guys, that could be awful.
Yes. No, that's true. So on that, Adam's asked this question that I think I'd like to reshape your question, Adam, a little bit, because I think there's some faulty assumptions in there. So I'll tidy it up for you, Adam. He's got a dilemma is, how do I find this balance, Rids, between chasing a good matchup versus being too short-term focused and only picking a guy for a 1 to 2 week focus? Now, he's given some players and options there that I don't think are the right options, Adam, so we're just going to let them fall away. But let's actually answer the purity of your question. How do you balance good matchups and the immediacy of the payoff now versus in 3 to 4 weeks' time, it might not help you, Rids?
So the way that I look at it is I always look at the worst case scenario.
Right.
Now, the worst case scenario in any trade-in is that you're stuck with that player long term. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's why when I do the short plays, I like to have it 1 or 2 games and keep it at a very bare minimum. So that way, then if something happens, and I like to do it through the buys as well, because there's an extra trade associated through the buys. That's why I've been talking about doing these 1 week plays in AF and so on and so forth. But you have to accept, and your team has to be okay with him being stuck in it for longer than 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the caveat with that is that when you're looking at these types of players, it's not just the fixture that you need to be targeting.
Sure.
You know, it might be all well and good to say that, you know, St Kilda have a great 2 to 3 week fixture.
Great.
You're not going to go out and pick Max King as a key forward because of that 2 to 3 week fixture.
Yeah.
You're picking a player who's got the role, and you're typically picking a player who's got a lower price and got a low break even to match it. You know, this is why people are so interested in someone like, I'll put a name to it, Callum Mills when he returns back from injury.
Yeah.
Because his price will bottom at around 700K in AFL Fantasy and around 430K in SuperCoach. And he is a player that has been top 8 midfielder as recently as last year when he has the role. And looking at his scores, even when he's been playing down back, which is, you know, the worst case scenario for someone like him, he's still averaging 90 to 95, and he's going to be priced in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
It's 10 points of value for a
Minimum.
guy that could potentially have 25 points of value.
Yeah, it's a good
But
shot.
that's where you need to consider. It's not just the fixture. It's not just about being short-term. It's about the role of the player. As Rid says, what's the worst case scenario and what the break-even is and how much cash they can potentially make you in that 3-week block.
And
Yeah,
it's
it's
the
good.
other interesting dynamic to that is what is the player actually playing? Where are they playing?
The role. Oh, we can
Just
talk about
'cause-
what is the role they're playing.
But let's just look at Jack Sinclair, okay? He's pretty much spending 50% of his time in the back line, 50% of his time in the midfield at the moment.
Yep.
He's doing a split. Like, let's look at Jaden Short. He's playing pretty much 100% of defence some
Now.
weeks. And then next week, he might be jumping into the midfield.
Thanks,
Just
Jaden.
because there's a matchup that's favourable to defenders
Yeah, it doesn't mean.
doesn't mean he's going to be the beneficiary of that.
No,
Exactly.
that's a really good pickup. All right, last two questions because Corey Blackledge has asked an AFL fantasy question. I feel like, Corey, we've answered that for you about defender options off the bye. I felt like we've given you some nice answers throughout this episode, Corey. But he does give us a SuperCoach question. I'll throw it to you, MiniMonk, and then Rids, you can have Ian McRae's last one. In SuperCoach, he's looking at this trade option. Himmelberg and Fyfe in with Weddle and Mitchell out. He has put a caveat off the back is, but do I hold with the probability of Sicily being out for a month?
It's really tricky because it depends on how many trades you've got left.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you've got, 10, 11, 12 trades left, flick Sicily.
Yeah.
Just get the premium. Just go like for like. Can hold Seamus Mitchell and Weddle for a bit longer. They've got a bit more cash you can squeeze out of them. They'll play the round 15 buy and you can flip them at round 16 if you need to.
Yeah, Mitchell can go forward potentially. Yeah.
But if you're down to 7 trades this week, or even lower,
and you still got
need
2 or
to-
3 trade upgrades you want to make. Yeah.
yeah, I think that, flipping Seamus and Weddle is not a bad option. I really like the Fyfe shout. We've just talked about it with Rids. He's a pretty good option, especially someone who gives you that midfield forward swing. And Himmelberg helps out with that a bit more with his defender forward swing. I would caution with Himmelberg, just check that your round 15 buy isn't too heavy, especially down back. But if you can afford to bench him in round 15 down back, because there aren't a lot of people that have many round 15 defenders at this stage, then yeah, Fyfe and Harry Himmelberg probably gives you a little bit of cash as well. And then you can use that to maybe do your last upgrade at the back end.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about Sicily, and I wanted to talk about Sicily a little bit more, but I forgot all about Sicily because I'm old. Sicily is really interesting, because you can actually, if you're going to go down and get a couple of value options, they're pretty much the same price as Sicily. And it doesn't matter if you put names to it or not, but let's in SuperCoach go Yao. I keep pronouncing his name. Yo, whatever it is.
Just go early 90s.
Yeah, let's go Elliot and Berg, okay?
Sure.
If you're adding a dead rookie that's not doing anything for you on top of Sicily, you're going to have a little bit of cash left over out of that.
Yeah, you will.
And it's like, it's not a terrible option.
No, I think we're talking about creative ways of getting our sides where we want in terms of hygiene, but also in terms of maximizing salary cap on players. Yeah, it's a play. So, Rids, let's throw you the last question from Ian McRae, a long time supporter of the coaches panel.
I'll tell you a little secret.
Wrong. Oh, yeah.
He's older than me.
I think I might be wrong, but I think he might actually have been the first ever Patreon that we had too. So he's old school. He could actually probably be your dad, MiniMonk, just saying. Anyway,
grandfather. I think grandfather.
Grandfather.
Oh,
okay.
jeez.
I've had many beers with big fella at the footy over the years. So, he's actually a really good guy from Perth.
He is a good man.
But anyways, I won't give you all of his history. But
No, and I'll have to change the rating of the podcast if I do. He wants some helps with a V, C, and C, Rids. Last week he went Goulden into Dawson after the week before it not working the way he wanted with Laird as his captain. He's just feeling like, man, I just can't get it right. And he's always seeing the rest of his league and the rest of his opponents always crack 5 or 6 guys going 120 plus. Is there a secret to cracking the code for Ian? I think a lot of people feel that way this year, that are trying multiple different things to try to get the big ceiling game. What's your advice to help him who feels like he can't nail his VC or C most weeks?
I always like a high ceiling that didn't go high the week before.
With VC?
Of course.
Yeah.
But then I always go the safest captaincy option for the round.
And is that in terms of matchup or ownership?
No, a bit of both, but also consistency of the year. So let's just go to AF and Dream Team for now. Right now, Richmond are playing later games in the round.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain Richmond guy that's apparently not in the best 150 players in the league
No,
who's
but
going okay.
He hasn't dropped under 100 all year in that format.
Yeah, so I would consider him as safer captaincy option default as there could be.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the number one guy traded in last week from AF perspectives in Brayshaw, okay?
Sure.
Or one of them anyway.
One of the most, yeah.
He's got a monster ceiling. He didn't go a
Amazing.
monster score last week.
Nope.
He's that type of guy I really like to throw the VC on.
Yeah.
So I'd be looking at, say, Brayshaw / Dunkley into a Taranto this week myself.
In DTAF. Yeah, I quite like that. I think it's a really nice play. Hopefully that helps you, Ian, and others that are feeling like they're just swinging and missing for the year. It's nice parallels, and it's not just limited to Dream Team and SuperCoach. All right, lads, we're going to wrap up that episode for you. If you want to go check out an article about some upgrade targets off the buy from round 13 or 14 options, you can check them out at coachespanel.tv. Our Patreons have been getting those early, as well as a bunch of other exclusive content. If you want to join our Patreon supporter group, the links are in the podcast description of this episode. Good luck as you head into round 14, especially to you, MiniMonk. Congratulations on the year so far, and good luck in the back half of the year.
Thank you, and good luck for everyone else, including yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rids, as always, a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for your fine work on this episode.
What, no good luck for me?
No, you don't. You make your own luck. You don't need to be wished it.
Mate, I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you a little
too,
secret.
Rids.
I'm trading English this week.
I love that you've done
in
this.
Dream Team.
I don't want you to give anyone any reasoning or justification or explanation. I want to end our episode there. Rids, who won DT just a couple years back, is trading arguably, outside of Taranto, the best pick in 2023. Thank you. Well done. Good night, good morning, good evening. Rids, trading out. Tim English. Oh, this will be good.
Give it all, now give it true, give it up,